This video will provide tips for how to write the literature review chapter of your dissertation. You could also use these tips to write normal assignments, reports, and essays. We will discuss how to group text together, how to add context, how to critique theories and scholars, and we'll end with a discussion on signposting. You should try to group text together. This is a good technique for your literature review and also a normal assignment. So, in your literature review, you will discuss individual texts, but you will also need to group these texts together. This shows ownership. This shows confidence. This shows that you have read widely and you feel comfortable to group different texts together. For example, there are a number of studies that take a very broad international approach. This student has identified that Adams, Smith, and John's studies take an international approach, so she grouped them together. These studies may also talk about domestic issues, but generally, for the most part, these studies discuss international issues and they focus on these international issues or global issues. The marker also likes this type of group citation: Adams 2019, Smith 2020, Johns 2019. You bring all these texts together in one bracket. The more you cite, the higher your marks will be. Here is another grouping. There are a number of studies that focus on the entire industry. In contrast, some scholars have taken a different approach by focusing on specific industries. This is comparing and contrasting. This student has identified that 2 studies look at the entire industry and 2 studies only look at specific industries. So they contrasted these 2 groups of studies. They weigh up one group of studies against another. Another brilliant grouping is this student has categorized 3 different strands of the literature: studies that are practitioner focused, studies that are client focused, and studies that are industry centric. This categorization is from her reading of the text. She did this herself. She observed the most dominant aspect of a study and placed it in a category: genius. This categorization reveals her confidence and her mastery of the subject. This sentence is also like a mini introduction. After she states that there are 3 strands, she will now tackle each of these 3 strands one by one. So she will write a paragraph covering the practitioner-focused studies. Then the next paragraph, she will cover client-focused studies. Then a paragraph after that, she will discuss industry-centric studies. Another example is that the literature revolves around 2 dominant perspectives: social justice perspective and the business case perspective. Another example, and also the last example. So if you see 2, 3, or 4 studies doing something different, you have noticed that these studies are going in a different direction. These studies represent an emerging trend. There could be an emerging body of literature that seeks to bring together competing aspects, or maybe there's an emerging body of literature that seeks to incorporate something. You can group these emerging body of studies into one body and discuss this and categorize this. This is you predicting a new development in the literature. When you are researching, why not take note of the studies that you have read? Why not categorize the studies that you have read? Perhaps you have read studies that take a UK focused approach, so you jot it down. Or you have read studies that take an international approach, so you jot it down. It is always good to add context to the studies that you cite, because we should not see texts in isolation. Texts do not exist in a vacuum. Texts are surrounded by rich context. Texts react to other texts. Texts are impacted and influenced by other texts. So this is a normal sentence with no context. Simpson 2020 argues that legal approaches will not solve privacy issues. There is nothing wrong with this sentence, but there is no context. So let's look at the same sentence with just a little bit of context in red. Now we see that Simpson was reacting to something. He was reacting to the optimism of legal approaches. This added context. This shows the marker that you have read widely. You are aware of the greater context. You are writing with real depth and awareness. This is another normal sentence with no context. It is as if you pluck this sentence out of thin air. You have just skimmed the text. There is no depth here. But when you add context, just add a few extra words. Just add a few extra words to show that you have really read the article. You have not just skimmed through a random text. Here are some more examples. Johnson 2020, an American professor of education, stated that just adding these few words in red, it gives extra context. Very brief biographical information shows that you are aware of this author. You haven't plucked this author out of thin air. You're aware of this author's background. You are aware of the person that you're citing. Also, identifying which tradition the person is from. This student identified that Lee is a prominent feminist. This gives extra depth to your writing. It shows that you are aware of the people that you are engaging with. You are aware of the scholarship. Or Smith has several publications in the area of. Once again, you are aware of the author, you are aware of the scholar. All of this information can be found on the internet. A simple Google search and you can find the publication list of a particular author. And you can use this information to assert that this is a relatively new field for Jones. He previously published studies in the area of, so just by looking at their publication list, you realize that he published studies mainly in the area of CSR. And this particular essay is in the area of international law. So you make that distinction. And perhaps you could use this as a form of critique. You can critique the author. This is his first time publishing within this area. This is his first time researching within this area. So perhaps this has led to a number of mistakes. So signposting is fundamental to your literature review. You need to signpost throughout your literature review, or your lit review will be hard to follow. Signposting is when you use phrases and words to guide the reader through the content of your lit review. Do not overdo signposting because it can become a bit tedious. Every now and again, but not too much. There are 4 types of signposting that you'll need in your lit review. You could also use these types of signposting in your normal assignment. Number 1, explain your logic. Before you just jump in to discuss the literature, you need to first explain your reasoning, explain your logic. So for example, this student states that this section will focus on Johnson 1999, Smith 2008, and Jones 2016 because these articles lay down the foundations of learning and development in the private sector. Now that they have told us why they are focusing on these 3 studies, we understand why they are spending so much time discussing these studies. We do not have to guess. It is like they held our hand and took us through their lit review. They made it easy for us. Or when you are transitioning from one major section to another major section, let the reader know. Make it easy for the reader. Turning now to the second theorist. Moving on from the definition, it's important to do such and such. Another significant aspect of it is vital to use headings and subheadings in the lit review. This makes your work appear to be ordered and well planned. You make it easy for the reader to understand what is happening. Also use numbering to make it even easier. 3.0, then 3.1, then 3.1.1. Finally, after each major section of your lit review, why not conclude your thoughts? Re-emphasize the points that you were trying to make. Do not leave it to the reader to figure out the gist of each section. Spell it out to the marker. Make it clear, as demonstrated, as evidenced, as discussed, as articulated, as mentioned. There are multiple problems with Lewin's model. These problems seem to have led to a reduction of its use in the organizational literature. You are free to make a statement like this because you have done the reading. Now you can give a verdict on this body of literature that you have just discussed. Always good to conclude each major section. Let the marker know your thoughts. And lastly, you will need to critique scholars. I have a video entitled Critical Research and Critical Reading Techniques for Dissertation Students. In this video, you will learn how to get critical information from scholars. You'll get information of how to critique theories, models, and frameworks in a very short space of time. And I have another video on this channel entitled How to Critique Academic Literature. This will give you the tools to critique scholars directly. You yourself, you will be able to critique scholars after watching this video. It's always good in your lit review, your assignments, your essays, your reports, that you are able to critique scholars or theories or models. Both of these videos will give you the skills to do that. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe.